I've lived on 10 acres of land for the past few years, out in the middle of the woods and countryside, with the nearest home being a full 3 miles away. It's not my property. My mother and father bought it, but they are out on the truck, often because they own a trucking business. It just made sense that I, a 22-year-old woman who works from home, keep a room on the second floor as I save up some cash for my own place. That is to say, I've known these Minnesotan woods for a while. I could walk the little trail with my eyes closed. I played hide and seek in them as a child, and we still host Easter for the family, burying the eggs past the wood line for the younger cousins. I also know what a mountain lion sounds like, and I know that they aren't common up here. It started after my dog died. It was a rather sudden event. My brother, who was just helping me with groceries since I only have one hand, had gotten home with me from the supermarket when we found him. He was walking in circles, foaming at the mouth, and not recognizing his name. When we brought him to the vet, they were worried about rabies, but that test came back negative. No, it was a nasty brain tumor that would have been incurable even if he had lived through the seizures. After that, I became more of a recluse than I already was. I took more walks, started eating less, and decided I'd rebuild myself. I planned to go back to in-person work once I had transformed. The third time I crossed the fence, I first heard her. I'm a short woman, 5 foot on the dot, and this fence was barbed, but incredibly low to the ground in some spots where the previous property owner had run out of wire. It was a woman, no doubt. Her voice started low, but rose to a high pitch that had me bolting back toward my house like I was 15 again and still in track. The sound chased me all the way to my door. I called the police as soon as I was inside. I let them know my location, what I had heard, and that she was likely in danger. I couldn't hear the screaming once I was in my house. My other dog, a mutt named Sweetie, who is too fat and old to want to go on any kind of long trek, hadn't responded to any noises. Not that she was much of a guard dog anyway, but the total lack of reaction made me confused. The cops showed up, and I explained everything. I brought them down the trail, showed them where I heard it, and sent them on their way. They found nothing and left before dark, but that night I dragged Sweetie with me and slept on my parents' bed like a child, keeping them on the phone late into the night while my father teased me relentlessly. My treadmill was my best friend for a while after that. I would call my brother or sister over whenever they didn't have work, begging them to keep me company for as long as they could. I've always had bad anxiety, having been diagnosed with it at an early age. By the end of the first week, the 2 of them were sick of me. They refused to help even when I offered to cook or pay for their gas. I tried everything. It had been 3 weeks, and my parents were often out for months at a time because they loved the open road more than anything else. I just wanted to get over the noise. Sweetie wasn't used to collars or leashes, being a country dog through and through. so she tried to shake me off when I hooked her up and walked around the tree line. Not inside of it. I stayed in the clearing that made up the majority of the acres we lived on. Hearing nothing, I got more and more bold. I stopped bringing Sweetie. I started walking back through the woods and past the fence again. Now, there is something that I haven't mentioned yet. During that first week, when I kept my brother and sister around, I got some more devastating news. My great-great-uncle, someone I wasn't particularly fond of or close to, had passed away. And as a result, his son had taken his own life. We were a close, big family. We could feed armies with how we cooked for family get-togethers. Or we could, arguably, be an army ourselves with how many of us there were. 12 great-grandparents. Each of their kids had 4 of their own, and so forth. We didn't exclude those who weren't blood-related, either. So, when anyone died in any sort of way, it always hit hard. That sounds like a random fact about my life. But I promise that I think I know what this thing is. And those 2 deaths could be a very, very clear clue. The second time, I had this feeling a few moments before, as if I was expecting it. My heart had been racing, and I was unusually deep in the forest. Uncomfortably so, now that I think about it. My chest ached, and then the noise erupted. It wasn't closer, and it wasn't different. It was still her, starting low and then growing. It pierced my ears and scrambled my thoughts until I felt entirely like prey. I'm sure I even moved the same way I've seen deer run in the dark away from headlights, wishing that I had eyes on the side of my head so I could watch everything as I ran. My heart was thundering, and my sides were painful. I didn't look behind me when I shut the front door, and of course, I called the cops again. I stationed myself in my parents' room with their guns. They had given me the code to the safe the first time I heard the noise. Sweetie pawed at the door, but for some reason, even she felt like a threat. Like any dog if you ran through the house, she had gotten up to follow, but she wasn't reacting to anything outside. Nothing. The screaming was gone now. But Sweetie was usually so stupid that she would bark at the door for 30 solid minutes after the mailman was gone. I stayed on the phone with the dispatchers until the officers were at my door, and I didn't lead them to where I'd heard it this time. They took the description and told me to stay with family for a while, but that was already my plan. I pleaded with them to wait there until I safely left. It took 2 days before the handwritten condolences flooded the Facebook feed for my little town. The male officer, one of the 3 who had been there both times, had died of a heart attack. It was sudden, and if I take the comments at their word, he was a rather healthy man. I didn't leave my sister's apartment in the city until I was forced to. Her boyfriend was moving in with her, and I had already made arrangements to move in with my brother instead. He had an actual guest room and had already been moving my work equipment with my help on the weekends. My sister, I'll call her R to keep her anonymity, talked me into staying one last night. It's about a 4-hour drive from the cities to my parents' house, with hours of traffic in between. I had tried to talk her into going to our brother's for some sleep, but she refused adamantly. See, R likes her plans. When we go out, she picks the places, picks the times, and picks how many stops we're allowed. Not that I've ever minded much. I usually got to pick what we were doing, and that had always been enough for me. She didn't listen to me this time, and by God, I wish she would have. We stayed together in the living room until she got tired first. We both work for banks, but I work afternoons for the call centers and support side, while she's a retail banker and prefers to get up early on her days off, too. She offered to go with me on one of my walks before she laid down for the night, ironically trying to get me out of my comfort zone. She still thought that I was speaking nonsense. I refused her 4 times before she threatened that she would just go outside by herself, and that scared me even more. That thing had only come for me when I was alone so far, but that didn't stop the idea that it could attack in groups. I agreed to short laps that stuck close to the house, and she didn't argue. Our quiet walk turned to a chatty one, and then we were laughing as we discussed work stories and how poorly her boyfriend was adjusting to the city. Then we talked about dogs and books we've read, and finally, she asked about the one thing I've been refusing to discuss. "You've got to tell me," she teased. "Did it really happen?" What? I was, at the time, genuinely confused. Nothing we had talked about was even close to the subject, and usually she was smart enough to avoid mentioning anything that could make me spiral. My sister and I are so close that sometimes, I swear, I can read her mind just by staring into her eyes. The more she squinted at me, the more I recognized what she was asking. I shook my head. Our family believes that what you speak into the universe is what comes to you, and I did not want to even think about that woman and whatever she was, screaming, chasing. I got shivers recalling it. I don't want to talk about it," she hummed in this mocking tone that she used a lot, and then she coughed. Patting her back, I laughed and called out, "What goes around comes around." She coughed again, though, and again, clutching at her chest. I was terrified, and I knew that the thing was coming. I knew as soon as I felt the pressure on my own chest and the pain digging deep, threatening to take my life as well. This was its pattern, I'm certain of it. I started to carry my sister toward the house as quickly as I could. She had stopped coughing, but she was struggling to breathe and sweating, as if we'd been walking in the summer heat rather than a cool fall night. She was dry heaving occasionally, and if you knew my sister, you would know that she got sick at even just the thought of vomit. I barely remember fumbling with the door, or how my sister was struggling to stay standing by herself. I hated being so weak right then. The moment we were inside, I called 911 again. Not for the creature. It would never be found if it didn't want to be, but for my sister. I was crying for them to get here as soon as they could, telling them that I was sure it was a heart attack. I couldn't stop the scream that erupted from me, however, when I turned around and looked down the road to watch for their arrival. It was there, not at the window watching us, but behind the outdoor stairs, peeking through the bars. Its face was human, almost. A woman's, surely, if it was human. Like a barn owl, however, it had beady black eyes that didn't blink. Her hair was a black mess that looked either greased down or wet, and her mouth was pushed out from her skull, stretched grotesquely over her thin lips. It was almost beak-like. Her shoulders, where the stairs cut off the rest of her being, were covered in thick black and gray feathers. They looked like feathers, even from this distance. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the ugly mess. In that moment, I went from feeling entirely like prey to taking a more defensive position. I locked the door and jumped over my sister to run and grab a gun. But by the time I was back, it was gone. The lights were already blinding in the distance, and the ambulance was on its way. R did have a heart attack that day, but miraculously, she survived. As soon as she was stable, I returned by myself. Stupid, I know, but I was desperate. Beside the stairs where I had seen it, I found the only evidence I'll ever get. A handful of feathers left on the ground, and human footprints where she had stood and met my eye. I don't actually know what it was, but if I had to guess, I'd say it was a banshee. An owl-like banshee, with beady eyes and a beak, and nothing in that empty stare as she tried to take the life of everyone around me. Edit. My first assumption wasn't a banshee, but were mostly Irish, Scandinavian, and general European. So, when I asked my grandfather last year about what this was, he scoffed and asked what I had done to incur a banshee's wrath. Apparently, they may just be territorial. I also asked my mother about the fence as I was writing this. After she took a read over, she reminded me that we were not the ones who put up the fence. The previous owners had, and we, as children, actually hadn't been allowed to cross the fence line. I do remember having to grab some eggs across from it, but it was probably the wind that blew them across, so I fixed it. If anyone does know what this is, please tell me.